The name of this panel is the ecosystem inside, Rethinking the Organization. I'm Julia Kirby. I'm with Harvard University Press, but more important to this group, I'm also a member of the steering committee for the Drucker Forum. So I've had the privilege of doing a lot of conversing and planning and thinking along with Richard and others on the steering committee about the program design. I mean, as you can probably imagine, when you create one theme for an entire program, such as the power of ecosystems, then you immediately have the design challenge of how do you do panel after panel without having people repeat themselves? How do you sort of parse that topic into all the different angles you could take on it? So I think you'll appreciate that over the full 2 days, that you're going to see a lot of different entry points and points of view and ways of thinking about ecosystems. Now, the particular focus of this panel is, although typically when we think about a business ecosystem, we think about an organization, sorry about the booming, and all of its sort of suppliers, its regulators, its customers, stakeholders, all those other parties outside of its walls that make up its ecosystem. We wanted to also appreciate that within companies, you have what amounts to a complex ecosystem. The organization itself, which has in sort of traditional management thinking, often been thought of as almost like a machine with its cogs and its wheels and its very clearly laid out processes. If we think instead about that organization as a complex, adaptive, dynamic system full of people trying to work across those traditional silos, that's the focus that we're taking in this group. So I'll very quickly put some names to faces. You have, of course, your program materials, and I invite you to look at everyone's full biographies. Next to me is Ed Catmull. He is the co-founder of Pixar. And I was just appreciating this morning how deep his DNA in the company goes. Although he founded Pixar along with Alvy Ray-Smith and Steve Jobs, he actually was first recruited earlier in the sort of predecessor to Pixar by George Lucas to lead the computer division of Lucasfilm. So really, the entire ecosystem of Pixar has grown up along with Ed Catmull as a leader. The other interesting thing I'll mention about him at the outset is that when Disney acquired Pixar in 2006, Ed was also put in charge of Disney Animation Studios. And so even though they made a deliberate choice to keep these two animation studios, Pixar and Disney, as separate organizations, they put the same leadership over the two of them with some hope of some synergies coming about as a result. Next to Ed is Rick Goings, the longtime leader of Tupperware, although he's emeritus now. But he took, I would describe Rick's long tenure at Tupperware as a very entrepreneurial, even though it's an old company. The flagship product, the famous plastic container, was invented in 1946, and that's when the company came into being. So old company, but it was a very American company. Rick really made it into a global company. It's a very growth-oriented leader. Next to Rick is Axelle Lemaire. Axelle is now in charge of a part of Roland Berger, which is a platform to connect the strategy consulting firm and its clients with this very vibrant ecosystem of startup companies that could be part of the value that gets delivered to clients. It's called Terra Numerata. But prior to that, Axelle's experience was in government. She was a minister in the French government in charge of digital and innovation in portfolio, I guess you would say, as a French government minister. Next to her is Gisbert Rühl. He interestingly, also has a strategy consulting background, but he's one of these consultants who skips back and forth, or has in the past, with industrial leadership roles. And so for many years now, he's been at Klöckner. He joined there in 2005 as their chief financial officer, and for the last 10 years has been chairman of the management board, and as you'll hear, has brought about a sort of transformation in, I should mention, the oldest company on this panel. The company is now over 100 years old. It was formed in 1906. And now it is a full-fledged platform business. And finally, Arthur Yeung, who's got a strategic role at Tencent. Tencent, I guess, must stand, well, other than Terra Numerata, which is brand new, but as certainly one of the newer companies here. I think the company's about 20 years old, but it's had this meteoric growth. You probably know Tencent as, if you're involved at all in video games, it's the largest video game company. It's also in social media and other areas of tech. But if you play Call of Duty, League of Legends, Fortnite, these are all part of its portfolio. It now does over 300 billion in revenues and employs over 50,000 people. So that's what I call meteoric growth over that short time frame. So with those introductions, let's start our conversation, and I'm going to start right away with Ed Catmull. I want to mention, too, that Ed wrote a book, so you don't have to take all your knowledge of his, what he's done at Pixar from this panel. I think if you haven't read Creativity, Inc., then you certainly must. And I want to mention Creativity, Inc.'s subtitle. It's Overcoming the Unseen Forces that Stand in the Way of True Inspiration. So I guess I'm going to just throw that softball at you, Ed. What are those unseen forces? How did you overcome those at Pixar, and how is this an ecosystem story?
Well, first of all, I define creativity in a very general way, and that is, it is solving problems. And this is largely a group effort. And as we know, people are at the base of each company. So our job is to bring out the best in all of those people. And there are a few things that we've worked out, and it's taken a long time to figure out some of this. But one of them is in a lot of these meetings where we work out the problems, is we have to remove power from the room. That is, those who are trying to solve the problems are in a very vulnerable state because the problems are, in fact, unsolved when they start. So part of removing power is also addressing the problem of second class. As we know at a lot of companies, there are people who feel like they're second class. It is critical that we address this problem. And one way we express this is, does the least powerful person in the room feel safe to talk? And if they feel safe to talk, you have given them a message. But also, if they feel safe to talk, you have also given a message to the people who are expected to talk. A second barrier has to do with how we get full engagement. And fear is one of the components of that. People coming into a company, especially a successful company, are looking around for the cues about how to behave. So we typically start off with the values, the expectations, how we work. They ignore all of it. It doesn't matter. They're looking at the behavior, they're looking at the actual actions of the people around them and the company. What are the real values manifested in our actions? And the central problem we have is that we don't recognize the importance of what we don't see. Most people who have fears or reservations won't talk about them. A lot of our problems remain unspoken. How do we address something that we can't see? And it is very easy, in fact, it is common to undervalue what we can't see because we're not talking about it. We also overvalue the dangers that we can clearly see, which is one of the reasons a lot of companies become very conservative over time. Now, we start with the assumption that everybody wants to do well, that everybody wants to make a mark in the world. That's the assumption. There may be people who prove they're not that way. That does happen. You manage them out. But the base assumption is they don't have to prove that they're good or they want to grow. They, in fact, do want to grow. So at Pixar, we've been working out these ideas for many, many years. Keep iterating, keep changing, trying to understand and challenge even the ideas that we had in the past. We are searching for what we don't know. And I can't emphasize this enough. It is very subtle. I can never be, as an example, I can never be another gender. I can never be another ethnicity. And I can never be raised in another culture, which means there are experiences which I can't have and I can't fully experience or fully know. But I can have the faith that the experiences that others have, that their views are of great value. And when we open up for the things that we can't see to bring into our organization and the way we solve the problems, we become better and we become more creative.
You know, I'm going to take you in a direction we didn't talk about earlier, but because this is an ecosystem-oriented event, I mean, people think about Hollywood, and it's sort of got this ecosystem. It's an Uber ecosystem, meaning, you know, a super ecosystem, in that people kind of come and go in projects, and there's a lot of freelance talent, and groups kind of coalesce around a movie, and then they disband. But Pixar has this very different model where people come to work at the company, they stay working at the company, and so you have this continuity, which is really very different from the Hollywood model. Can you talk a little bit about, you know, what benefits that gives your ecosystem?
Well, for me, it's very important. One of them is that the people there have a vested interest in each other's success. They're also friends, but they understand at a deep level that another person's success is their success. So it becomes more important for them to help others because they know they will be in that position and they will have genuine help from other people. The second issue is we want everybody in the company to feel ownership of what we do and to feel ownership of the company itself. So when you give credits, for instance, listed in our credits is our kitchen staff. Right now, nobody else would do that, but our kitchen, our security, they're all listed, even the babies that are born during the production, because we want everybody to feel like it's ours. And if we have that ownership, then they're not looking to the leaders to solve the problems. They believe their problems are owned by them, and it's their job to help figure it out, not to find out what I want to have happen.
So you have this famous institution that you created at Pixar called the Brain Trust. And so is part of the Brain Trust's maybe you can just very quickly explain what that is and why it really requires that sort of longevity of relationships and the kind of values that you were talking about to succeed.
Well, the brain trust evolved over time, but what it is actually is, it is the way we run a certain kind of meeting. And in that meeting, we have the peers of the people who are making the film. So it is peer-to-peer, it is not boss or leader to the peer. The managers over the group, the leadership over the particular project or a film are presenting what they've got to their peers. And they are very vulnerable because they know it doesn't work. So this is a group, having been through it, can understand the vulnerability. So their only approach is to help. So this is not a judgmental meeting. Nobody's walking out of this meeting saying, this isn't working, we're going to cut it off. That is completely forbidden. The people who are perceived to have power are supposed to shut the hell up for 10 to 15 minutes. And the reason is, if a powerful person speaks first, they've set the tone. We need them to wait, listen, and enter a conversation. And usually this works very well, as evidenced by the films. Once in a while it doesn't, it blows apart, and then we have to figure out why, what the dynamics were. But every once in a while, magic happens. And by magic, I mean that ego leaves the room. It is that ideas come and go, and people do not become attached to them. And when you reach that state, the advancement, the ideas grows at an incredible rate. So that's the goal. We don't usually get it, but that's the goal. But normally it's to make sure that we keep the power out of the room, we make it safe, and the rule is you have to be honest about what you think, and you have to listen to what is said.
I'm going to ask you one more question before I bring in another voice from the panel, and that's this curious positional challenge that you have that I mentioned in your introduction, that you had both Disney animation studios to preside over or to try to cultivate an ecosystem in, and you had, of course, Pixar. And so my question is, how much did you try to take, elements that succeeded in one place that were maybe products of one ecosystem and transplant them to the other? And can you share any learnings from trying to do that?
Yes, the decision that I'd made right as we got there was to keep the studios separate. At that point, Disney was not making good films. Almost everybody thought we should not do this, for good reasons. They thought it was risky because we would be spread too thin. I did not feel it was high risk because I had high confidence in the depth of management at Pixar. We knew that Disney was doing several things wrong, but we didn't know everything because, again, we don't see a lot of things. So we had a couple of rules. One of them was they could not do any production work for each other, but they could share ideas. So the rule there was you could beg, borrow, and steal ideas from the other, but you did not have to. So there was no existential threat. And when you shared ideas, you did not have to go through channels. You called anybody you wanted. And the result of that was that they grew in two different ways, and I learned from each one, but because they exchanged ideas from each other, then they would grow, they would pick what they thought would work for them, and they would reject certain things where I thought they made a mistake, but the rule was, it was their choice. And the notion of enforcing best practices, in my view, is a huge mistake. The other one is, this field is changing so fast that if we tried to merge these two groups together, all we would do is slow them down. Mm-hmm. That we're better off having groups that like each other, but also have kind of a competitive spirit. and it propels us forward at a faster rate. So others might say, why do you have 2 marketing groups, 2 research groups, 2 finance groups? The answer is, the cost of that is minor compared to the incredible advantage we have to this intellectual and creative pot, or 2 pots, that we had created. And that is still true to this day.
Thank you. I'm going to skip way down the road to Arthur Yeung next. So as I mentioned, Tencent, not such an old company, and yet apparently it was already ripe for a transformation. It had begun life in a sort of standard hierarchical approach to its work, and Arthur has helped to take it through this great transformation to operate in much more of an ecosystem mode. So maybe you can describe to us what the challenges were that and explain the thinking behind it.
Yeah, I have a few slides to give people some background so that we can further discuss on that. First of all, it's a great honor to be with the panel to share about how Tencent evolves and we think about its organization based on ecosystem logic in the last decade. What I'm going to do is I'm going to use our game business as an example. First of all, Tencent is a very quiet company. So let me give a little background about the company. Who are we? We are fundamentally a social network company, collecting more than 1.15 billion active users through our WeChat, and then 730 million users through our QQ platform. So based on a huge social networks with a lot of interaction connection with our user, we are able to build upon this network with some digital contents, such as our games, our video, our music, because our users are using it a lot. On the other hand, we are also providing internet service to enterprise, such as WeChat Pay, cloud, as well as our social advertisement. So that's pretty much the core of Tencent business. However, as the business grows in complexity and in size, we find that how to maintain agility, innovation, and customer obsession become a top priority for the company to survive and thrive in a fast-changing and unpredictable environment. Let's use games, Tencent games, as an illustration. Because our game business is doing quite well, as a result, we found out that our studios is getting bigger and bigger and bigger with a lot of layers. Guess what? It slowed down our approval. It slowed down the game development process due to a lot of approval. Also, we found out that the cross-unit collaboration along the game development value chain, including the studio, publishing, and distribution, is getting more and more time-consuming, if not frustrating. Cross-unit collaboration is also difficult in a traditional hierarchy. At the same time, we found out that the competition we face in mobile internet is getting intense because a lot of new players can develop their games with abundant supply of venture capital, cloud service, and also the distribution channel nowadays made available by Android and iOS stores. Even worse, because of these kind of opportunities, we found out that many great talent may not want to join Tencent. They want to start their own company. We also find that some of our talent also leaving us to do their own startup. So that's pretty much the kind of challenges we were facing about 5 or 6 years ago. So what did we do? Basically, we are using the ecosystem logic to rethink and redesign our organization. First of all, we broke our 8 large studios into 20 plus small autonomous studios. They are fully empowered so that they become agile and take a lot of bottom-up initiatives, rather than waiting for the direction from the top, or rather than going through a lot of approvals. We also empower this kind of small agile studios nowadays with a lot of centralized shared expertise, so that the studios can focus on what they are doing best, game development, without worrying about marketing, HR, finance, or development tools. So we use the platform to support a whole bunch of agile small teams so that they can focus on what they do the best. We also redesign our home bonus so that the bonus of the studio is closely tied to the profit contribution of the games they developed, so that they have a strong sense of ownership and entrepreneurship. Guess what happened nowadays? The studio leader become very prudent in adding headcounts or using a lot of expenses because it affects their profit and their bonus distribution. We also found out that they are working extremely hard nowadays so that they can roll out good games faster than their competitors, not only among studios, but outside competitors. It's so devoting or working so hard to the extent that at Tencent, for the game business, we have a rule. On Wednesday, no one can work overtime. At 6 o'clock, you need to go home. Because these people are working so hard day and night, we are worried about their health. So that kind of entrepreneurship is quite obvious after you change the whole design. And finally, we also use a revenue sharing along the value chain of studios, publishing, and distribution, so that we treat each party almost like a standalone party or entity in open market. So nowadays, instead of focusing on a lot of internal negotiation for resource, your focus should only on developing great games. Because if you have great games, everyone will provide you the best resource out of their own interest, because they share the revenue along the way. What happened after we changed this kind of organization from top-heavy layers, hierarchy, to more this kind of ecosystem based on platform, small agile teams, regulated by market arm or market relationship? We found out that we continue to roll out a lot of robust games, such as Honor of King, PG Mobile, AOV, Call of Duties. And then also as a result, Tencent, in terms of game, we are one of the top 10 companies in the world. And then the year-to-year comparison is also doing well. So I just want to give some brief idea on the background of ecosystem inside Tencent. Of course, we have a whole bunch of ecosystem outside. We invested in more than 700 companies. And then we build a strong ecosystem in each vertical domains so that it enrich our product offerings, strengthen our technological capabilities, and provide access to important channels. Actually, Tencent is not the only company that are using the logic of market-oriented ecosystem. Last year, I studied Amazon, Google, Facebook, Supercell, Alibaba, Didi, etc. 8 companies all together. And I found the principles are very similar. And I wrote it down in a book, which you can find outside, published by Harvard Business Review. It's called Reinventing the Organization. So that's pretty much the backdrop I want to share. Thank you.
Thanks, Arthur. And thanks for mentioning your book, because I think probably embedded in it is a long answer to this question. I see I'm already getting questions through Slido, so I want to reinforce that message that I am monitoring these, and I do appreciate them, and please use that mechanism in this panel and throughout the conference. But one that's just come up, it's so moving towards a more co-creative and self-organized mode means changing work habits and worldviews. So where are the biggest pushbacks coming from? Like, as you did this transformation, there's never a transformation in which everyone is thrilled with the process of transformation. What were the particular pushbacks that you had?
The particular pushback would be people in the middle. because we don't need to have so many layers now. We push the decision-making power to the front line so that much smaller studios, and then they run their own. So the major pushback is in the middle. But as a matter of fact, people working in the studio like this kind of strong linkage between your contribution and your reward. They feel a strong sense of ownership. They have the power to make decisions. And they really enjoy the process, and they commit their energy and resource wholehearted into the work. So I think overall, majority like it, company likes it, because we're doing well in terms of our business result. But people in the middle, they need to redeploy, either go to work as in the platform or do something else.
Thank you. Before I just move straight on to ask Axelle to give some background on what she's been doing, we've already heard kind of two organizations' stories, so I just want to ask my other panelists, whose voices especially haven't come in yet, is there any reaction that you would give to what themes you've heard raised so far? Rick, can I cold call you on that, or?
Yeah, maybe.
Yeah.
So because we are a completely different company than, obviously, than Tencent, but we are thinking to a certain extent, honestly, in the same direction. So we, for instance, we have internally at Klöckner, meanwhile, very broad implemented hierarchy-free communication. So we're using also a social network, if you like. We're using the one we have from Microsoft, Yammer, in this case. And we are, interestingly, according to Microsoft, globally one of the 3 most intensive users of Yammer. And with this, we have a lot of virtual groups, meanwhile, within the company who solve problems and who create ideas. So we have, on the one side, we still have the hierarchy, and on the other side, we have now a completely different kind of communication, a more really hierarchy-free communication. And I'm thinking in the same direction that we might change our organization more to a platform type organization. I don't know exactly how it will look like in the end. Maybe I have to read your book, probably. But I think we will move also because we anyhow see ourselves more in a platform ecosystem going forward. We might even also, as a very traditional company, move into this direction. So very interesting.
Actually, I would like to add on that point. Mm-hmm. If you look at the case or the company I cover, most of them are high-tech and internet firms. But I see the similar trend for traditional firms in different industries because of the impact of digitalization, of the impact of industrial internet. And because of that, you find that the organization can be flatter. And then you need to have a very strong mid-platform to integrate all data so that you become smarter and make a lot of decisions along the whole value chain as well.
Yeah, agree.
All right, so this, I guess, theme has already started to emerge here, and also in our prior panel, that the modern organization can be seen in itself as a sort of a platform. It kind of lays a foundation that lots of teams working sort of autonomously can tap into and leverage to create value. And so there's a management challenge implied by that. If you learned how to manage, I guess, in a traditional kind of company, then what do you need to unlearn or learn now if you're now thinking of what you're creating as a platform or as an ecosystem kind of play. So Axelle, you're thinking about all this right now. You're responsible right now for getting a new platform established, and it's a whole new initiative. So I'm especially curious about how that's going, but also that it's connected to Roland Berger, which has a very strong culture, existing organization, and maybe you can also tell us what has to change inside that existing organization for what you're trying to do to work?
Very good. Good morning, everyone. So Terra Numerata is not as big as Tencent yet, but we're getting there. Just commenting on what have been said so far, it's great to be in the consulting industry because one gets to observe with a 360 view the business trends, right, in all various industries. And it's obvious that at the moment, all the companies, especially the large, big multinational companies, are questioning their model, asking themselves if it hasn't been done yet, how they could transform to become platforms and have a business model based on a larger ecosystem. I've heard it from the automotive industry, from the aerospace industry, energy suppliers, and very recently the director of a nuclear plant asking me how he could succeed in developing an open ecosystem. Think about the nuclear industry, right? It's all about safety, very highly regulated environment. What's at stake is national security, and still they want to base their organizational model on an open ecosystem. So this is what we're doing, at least trying to do at Roland Berger. So Roland Berger is a traditional consulting firm. It was created in Germany. It is now a global company. I am based in Paris, and we have developed a platform based on collaborations and partnerships to transform the consulting industry. So instead of only having very bright people with analytical skills and mindsets developing strategies for clients, they will partner mainly with startups. So Terra Numerata is a network of 100 startups, mainly technology companies, to try to mix up the technology insights, be it data analytics, machine learning, deep learning, applied to a specific industry or to a specific function, such as supply chain, be it also new methodologies that will change the culture of a company, such as using design thinking or even design fiction to try to imagine possible futures. It can also be using a technological platforms to lay down a strategy together with all the employees. It could be tens of thousands of employees. So instead of only conducting interviews and doing some polls or quantitative research and then in one room and then producing slides in the end and telling the company you should be doing that, it's actually co-designed with all the different stakeholders within the companies. So, and we've done that, and it's pretty successful, not only in the business result, but in the level of engagement that it creates amongst the people involved. So this is what Terra Numerata is about, really trying to inject innovative ways of doing business. That means being preserved with some spaces reserved for those experimentations, right? That means having a very strong leadership support, but also being able to count on more top-down forces and ambassadors, as we could call them, most often younger people, very junior in the organization, that will play a role in helping accelerate the transition and the transformation. And so what I've realized is that it's very important to define KPIs, but new KPIs. They are more long-term. We're into business development. This space for experimentation and innovation needs to be preserved. It also needs to be rewarded adequately when it is successful, rewarded being not only in a negative way, the price or the cost of not doing it, so losing out projects, not being experts enough on certain subjects, losing track and traction with the business reality. No, it's also real, salarial incentives when projects are successful. And I was surprised by the positive impact in terms of management. 1 out of 2 candidates at Roland Berger that apply to be hired by the company will mention this ecosystem model in their letter, saying, I want to be part of it. I want to help build that larger ecosystem. So it's not only about the consulting industry only, it's about co-building solutions with maybe competitors in certain circumstances, maybe with clients when it comes to co-building a new mobile applications, for example, or launching a new services for an online bank. So it also means a lot of mutual trust, a lot of transparency, really a belief in the power of collaboration. And so why I'm a firm believer in that model, it's because I experienced it when I was in government. So that was 3 years ago, I had to defend a bill in Parliament. And that bill, I wanted it to be about subjects that hadn't been addressed before by policymakers, such as introducing the principle of open data by default, such as privacy rights online, data portability, e-gaming, and how to authorize the organization of competition for e-gamers or in e-sport competitions, open source technologies to be encouraged, and dealing with the digital divide and all that kind of subjects. And there was a certain level of reluctance from my administrations, either because they didn't know enough about these subjects, because they lacked the internal resources to properly deal with them. They feared that they wouldn't control everything, and it was very difficult to make it through, right, with pushing that bill to Parliament. And so I decided to organize an online consultation to put that drafting of the bill, to transform it into a totally transparent legislative process, onboarding citizens online so that they contribute, not only comment on the text, but even write amendments and write new articles. And so the whole process, I think, was very successful. When the current French president launched the Grand Débat, I don't know if you've heard about it, this national debate, he used the same platform, technological platform, that the one I used back then. It was very successful because there's one KPI in politics that is pretty objective. It's the fact that that bill was unanimously adopted by Parliament, both chambers, the National Assembly and the Senate. This never happens. And it's not only because digital was supposedly a glamorous subject, right? It's really because we had been through a whole process of trying to find the right compromises thanks to transparency, dialogue, confrontation of ideas in a neutral platform, right? And by turning towards a larger ecosystem composed of all stakeholders, the civil society, unions, organization, lobbies, of course, but all involved at the same level. And so what I've learned out of that experience is that not only governments should not only acquire power and try to keep it, or probably not even try to keep it, but really they're there to empower citizens and organizations, but also that this came as a very motivating agenda for the public servants themselves, and they actually changed their mind about the whole process. And a couple of months after that consultation, the European Commission had asked us to submit the official position of the French government on a specific topic, and we were just about to write a very classic standard document, and they actually turned to me, these people in the administration, saying, why don't we organize a consultation? And so the resource problem or the understaffing was no longer an issue, because they found they were so proud of being part of a larger community, not at the center, but as kind of magnets, animating debates and building the policies upon the ideas of a larger community based on collective intelligence, that they wanted to do it again. So I think in terms of management, building that ecosystem can be extremely fruitful.
Thank you, Axelle. Let's bring Gisbert's voice in a little bit more here. You've already given us some preview of your thinking about creating this platform for the metal industry. So you had been one player within this sector of yours. What problem were you trying to solve? What was the opportunity that you saw there for this new direction that you took the company into? And then I guess you still have the traditional organization there. So how did creating now a platform for your entire sector change how you thought about your own organization's position within that whole system?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, our industry is currently still very typical. So we have this very typical linear supply chain from the producer through distributors, service centers, then down to the customers. And we were imagining a couple of years ago, more than 5 years ago, that this might change going forward also into a platform ecosystem, because there is a finally huge advantage on the customer side. So currently, for a customer dealing with the steel supply chain is a very cumbersome process, very intransparent, and very manual. And we were thinking at that point in time, when there would be for a customer one interface to a platform through which this customer can buy more or less all kind of steel and metals products, very transparent, so very convenient, then this might be the future also for our industry, so driven by the customer. And we don't want it to wait until someone else is developing such kind of a platform, and therefore we started on the one side to develop this platform, which is meanwhile established in the industry. So it's an open platform. This is important. It's a platform where not only Klöckner is selling their products, also competitors have the same access to this platform than we have. And the platform is also already very independent from Klöckner. So we got the approval from the German cartel authorities, but we had to put a Chinese wall between us and the platform, because on the platform there are also competitor data. But on the other side, we also had to transform Klöckner itself, because developing only a platform and trying to establish a platform itself alone will probably not work, at least for us in a very traditional industry. And therefore we also started about 5 years ago this digital transformation of Klöckner itself. And we're seeing also for us as a traditional company opportunities in this platform economy. Of course, first of all, as mentioned, the customer will benefit very much from this ecosystem, and then also the platform operator, because the platform operator moves itself between the customer and us, if you like. So the platform we created will also, to a certain extent, disruptive to our business, because the platform will also, of course, take over, if successful, a certain share of the margin. But we're seeing also an opportunity for Klöckner itself when we are digitalizing the company in a way that we can interact on a nearly real-time basis with this platform. And the opportunity is then for us, especially in this very fragmented industry where we are in, that we then also on the traditional side can, if you like, consolidate the industry to a certain extent. And also because small and mid-sized competitors will probably have not the opportunity to digitalize their business as fast as we are doing it. So we're moving in two directions. And so on the one side, we have this digital transformation of Klöckner itself. And on the other side, we then have this platform business. Both is currently under one roof, but most probably we will have to separate this going forward. So we have to make the platform really completely independent from us. And therefore, I think in the next 1 or 2 years, we will probably split the company then in two parts. So one really asset-free platform business, and on the other side, this end-to-end digitalized fulfillment business for such kind of platforms.
You know, I want to also have you talk about yourself. You know, so you've talked about how your traditional organization has to respond to the fact that you're taking a more ecosystems view, but then there's also the fact that you are a leader of that organization. So what's changed about how you lead now that you've transformed the company in this way?
Yeah, this kind of transformation needs, of course, leadership, especially in a very traditional environment like Klöckner, because in principle, our people don't want any change. And they don't like change. And this is, by the way, also a reason why it would not have worked only to develop such a platform, because we wouldn't have got any support for this platform from the company itself, because they would also, when all employees fear this new kind of business, this platform ecosystem, then they will not support it. So you also have to show that our people can benefit as well. And we did a couple of things to make this happen. For instance, at Klöckner, since 4 years, we have a digital academy, and all our people have the opportunity to do unlimited digital courses within the working hours. Because with this, we wanted to increase, on the one side, the digital IQ of our company itself, and on the other side, we want to make sure that our people learn and how this digital economy works, so that they lose fear. But we're saying also on the other side that we probably could not employ any more people within the next 5 years without any digital experience. And digital experience means also, of course, knowledge of artificial intelligence, because the digitalization of Klöckner itself is very much driven by AI. So the whole order process and everything, all this will be in the end completely digital and very much driven by AI. By the way, also in a way that our customers don't necessarily have to digitalize their business, because this is always the problem in B2B. When you want to make business with your customers in a digital way, and also with the suppliers, you typically have to convince them. But we found a way that they don't have to change anything, and we make of every customer, from every customer, we make out of every customer a digital customer by our AI processes. And all this has then to be communicated on a continuous basis to the people, to our people. And this is why we are so intensive, why we are so intensive user of Yammer. So because my communication, so within Klöckner we don't have any CEO communication only to the management level anymore. So all my communication goes always to all of our people through Yammer, and with Yammer I'm able to get in touch with all of our people, which was of course not possible in a hierarchy, in a typical hierarchical communication. And I would also say without such a social network within the company, also this transformation wouldn't have worked. And now comes, I would say, maybe even a more challenging part when we have to change this organization itself from a hierarchical organization to a more network type, to a more platform type organization. This is of course a huge challenge, but I think with this hierarchy-free communication, which we have since 4 years, we are very well prepared. But in the end, okay, it needs leadership, so you have to be engaged as a CEO, also in details, that you really know what you're doing, and it's more or less continuous, so in my case, more or less daily communication with our people, what we're going to do, and how the future might look like.
Thank you. So having brought up this leadership question, it's a good segue to bring in Rick Goings. Rick Goings, a longtime, very good friend of the Drucker Forum, and someone with a real fondness for Austria as well. So welcome back. So I think, again, Tupperware, old company, 70 years old or so. And you're also our only product manufacturer here on the panel. So in a way, kind of the most traditional seeming company, but kind of ironically, it's kind of this progenitor of an ecosystem business in terms of what the business model has been based on this small army or large army of Tupperware party holders who make up so much of the ecosystem that you deal with. So maybe you can talk about the care and feeding of that ecosystem, and what does the company have to do to sustain its growth, make sure everyone in its ecosystem continues to prosper and be well served.
I think at the very core of it, Julia, it's been 3 years since I turned over, and actually we had to turn over my successor 2 weeks ago. And it gets at the core of what gives you competitive advantage and how do you stay with that competitive advantage. And the ecosystem that really built Tupperware, I always come to these conferences and I want to leave with a couple ideas of something. I'm looking for, man sagt auf English, the so what's of it, and where I've got an idea or two, and maybe I can give you one here. The hiding in plain sight that made Tupperware work was women. There are many inventions. Earl Tupper came up with this product that had a seal on it, an airtight seal. Well, most people looked at it and they said, well, it really doesn't fit. Well, actually, it had to go on that way to be an airtight seal, so women started demonstrating it. And actually, first woman on the cover of Business Week magazine in the mid-50s, Brownie Wise, she was really behind it. She says, we'll just get groups of women to do it. And when I say this on the hiding in plain sight, this is probably my 20th year, at Davos at the World Economic Forum, and so much of what we've been trying to do is gender parity, getting women more involved in it, and that's been the story of it with Tupperware.
Kind of what we call today women's economic empowerment, bringing a lot of women who haven't
The studies show it, Julia. If you empower a woman economically, you actually start to nation build. The Global Fairness Initiative came to us a couple years back, and we did a study in Indonesia of our business, and our business in Mexico. And across the world, we have more than 3 million women. And what they found is 3 years engaged with us, she went from lower class to middle class. She went from self-esteem, feeling I'm not good enough, to I am good enough. Actually, a third said I'm a leader. She became connected to other women. 70% got either a smartphone or a computer. And last, and this is the one I'm most proud of, in both of these countries, we're in a world where 1 out of 3 women is abused sometime in her life, we found he went from abusive behavior to appreciation, and actually, in many cases, he ended up working for her. So the hiding in plain sight was women looking for an opportunity, and that's what we built on, and it's a multi-local model. It's interesting, but I keep it on my phone. Qualities not measured in cognitive tests. Would you hire somebody who had these qualities? Reliability, persistence, enthusiasm, courage, passion, discipline, compassion, and motivation, self-motivation. We find that there's, the bulk of women are living not in Europe and the US. That's only 1.2 million population. They're living outside. They don't have opportunity. And I keep looking, I think the stories we like are find the things that are hiding in plain sight. So many of us are impressed with Uber, but it was there. I never will forget, I was trying to, when she was running eBay, Meg Whitman, I was trying to recruit her on a nonprofit board, and she said, do you know really what we do at eBay? Well, explain. I felt I knew. She said, we do the same thing you do at Tupperware. We basically put people in business. Our business is 25 million people selling on it, and yet we have a site where people buy, but it's really the empowerment of individuals that does it. In fact, I was kidding Mohammed Yunus, who received the Nobel Peace Prize, that he basically got it because they microfinanced. I said, Mohammed, we microfinance and then we give her a pathway to do it. And they call it at Davos the Tupperware effect, that she comes in, we microfinance her, we train her, she goes out, tastes success. When she tastes success, she feels confident. And when she has confidence, she has influence. So that's what I'm talking about. At the core of the ecosystem is something that was hiding in plain sight. And I've seen a number of companies that, I never will forget, last story. I had an Uber pick me up in Orlando several years ago. Wonderful woman, wasn't a brand new vehicle. Her name was Louise. I said, Louise, how long have you been doing this? She said, well, 3 months. I said, how are you doing with it? She said, I'm making twice what I was making. I said, what were you doing before? She said, cleaning houses. And I said, what'd you have to learn? She said, just how to work this silly thing, but I've been driving, honey, since I was 14, illegally. And then she went through, I knew my way around town. And then I started, as I interviewed her more, I found out that really was life-changing for her. And there are many out there right now we have yet to discover of opportunities out there that are hiding in plain sight that somebody hasn't thought of it yet. And it's a very Buddhist thought. If you're going to go down the river, figure out which way the river's going and where you want to get to. That's where you put in, to go with that. Cut with the grain. That's where the ecosystems are. You don't have to change all of them. You need to tap into some that are existing right now and look at the success stories that has made.
So you've just given a tremendous amount of credit for the success of your organization to this very distributed, atomized ecosystem of kind of micro entrepreneurs. So what does it mean the role of the leader is. What do you do in this equation? And what should some of these the new Uberized parts of our economy, what should the leaders of those realize is their responsibility if that's the kind of thing they are presiding over?
Well, it's to support that. It used to be this autocratic, then it was rules-based. Now, how do you get behind that and enable her to be able to go out there and utilize these skill sets that she already has? And, you know, yes, I get the education thing, but I'll tell you, we learned Davos, there's not going to be enough STEM jobs to go around. And what are we going to do with the 2.5 billion women who are already past 20 years old, who have these traits, but she doesn't have a college degree? We've got to come up with those, and leaders, we need to come up with those ideas. I have some friends in South Africa where we have a big 250,000 women there, but this other company called Blue Label, they came up with an idea that many of the African women don't have any credit. They're named Blue Label Telecom. They came up with a credit card. It was a telephone debit card. Women sell them now. It's what they use for credit. And they've grown into a giant company hiding in plain sight. These were women who were selling trinkets on the corner. Now she's selling telephone credit cards. That's where the bulk of the people live in the emerging markets of the world. And yet we come up with innovations and we run to these markets where all the competition is. I would encourage you, we've got 40% of the population living on $5 a day. That's where big opportunity is out there.
So I'd love to hear other comments about this sort of the leadership challenge of presiding over an ecosystem or cultivating a culture that's an ecosystem culture. Just before I came into this panel, I spotted a headline in the Wall Street Journal that said that Amazon is the new GE in terms of being seen as the incubator of CEO talent. So it's the new talent factory for leadership of companies. Whether or not you agree with that, I saw that and I thought, oh, does that mean, Amazon obviously platform ecosystem kind of company, does that mean that the type of leadership that's coming out of that company is more suited to a world of business ecosystems? Any thoughts?
Well, the first I have is there's an extraordinary intelligence in that company and Jeff Bezos, which is amazing. The basic approach, though, I do not think addresses the needs of the world. And the reason that the humanity of our groups and the way we think about the people in the world and their needs is so important is that, and I would say this in the case of Pixar, which of course is quite small, we focus on the human side because we're in the context that a lot of people don't fully understand, and that is that deep learning and increased computer speed is coming like a freight train, and within several years it's going to flatten a large number of companies and ways of doing things. Unless we make the transition to a human-based way of addressing problems, we're going to get slaughtered by a lot of these changes. To me, it's very strong. We've got to think about the culture, the way we treat people, not only internally, but externally, and empower people so that we don't have a consolidation of a single platform instead of many cooperating platforms.
Fantastic. Arthur, I saw you raise your hand.
I would like to add on that. When you look at Amazon, on the surface, it's one big company. But as a matter of fact, on top of one big company, different business group, there are thousands of startups going on within Amazon. They do a lot of experiment. Someone come up with some good idea. They articulate in PR and FAQ. Once you get the approval from someone, You form a small two-piece team, plug into the platform. The platform is important. It provides you the technology, data, resource, so that it's more like the kind of plug and play. So you experiment, 6-month prototyping, user test. If you do well, you scale up. If you don't do well, you fail. In the whole process, the key thing is this kind of person, they have a well-rounded business. They don't only focus on one piece. They really start the business. So I think for that kind of environment, it's a very good environment to develop leaders, well-rounded leaders, not functional leaders. In the past, hierarchical organization is good at developing functional leaders, sales, supply chain, etc. But when I talk about a studio, similar. You have a small studio, that studio is a general manager of the studio. He or she needs to manage finance, how to grow the business, how to reach customers, etc. So that's the best way to develop leaders and CEO in my mind.
But Julia, I want to come back to what Ed was saying here on this flattening everything else. It was in August, the Business Roundtable made the decision that it isn't shareholder value, isn't the purpose of business. And that has had primacy for 40 years. A group of us CEOs met with the Pope 3 years ago to discuss the same thing about what is the role of business. We had 100 years ago, the Sherman antitrust legislation was to ensure you didn't flatten and there just become one out there. That's one of my concerns out there. Jobs for people, incomes for people, opportunities for individuals to feel value, self-esteem. We've got to think of the bigger picture of that, of what kind of world do we want to have. And that's leaders, this compassionate capitalism, that we've got to think more about that, because it may be efficient that way, but what is the collateral damage to mankind when you do it?
Mm-hmm. Axelle.
I totally agree with what you just said. With great power comes great responsibilities, and the problem with this ecosystem platform model is that there's the big power, but not necessarily the big responsibilities. And so if it has to be horizontal and empowering, it needs to be redistributed, right? And the reality today is that the leadership is not necessarily redistributed, and the value for business and value for citizens is not necessarily redistributed. And I think we're at the moment in history where we've never been facing the possibility to have such huge economic players that have powers that go well beyond business, right? Without the capacity to tackle their horizontal and platform reality. And so that's where we are now at the moment. And without redistribution, I personally fear that we are going ahead of big troubles.
Great. Gisbert?
Yeah, a roadblock we have by transforming a traditional company is, of course, that most of our people are thinking incremental. And this is, by the way, also typical, of course, for hardware companies, because hardware developments are often only incremental. But platforms, and also when you take an iPhone, for instance, these are all exponential developments. And therefore, we need, of course, people who think exponential. They might then come from Amazon or Tencent or wherever, but we have to make sure that this works on the other hand in a traditional company. For instance, Google X is saying we don't want to achieve a 10% improvement, we want 10x. 10x, when I'm telling my people 10x, then they might say, oh, now he's getting completely crazy. Because a 10% improvement in the steel industry is already a hell of an improvement. So we have to find here the right balance. On the one side, making sure that our people, and this is leadership, really thinking more exponential, But on the other side, yeah, it has to align also to a certain extent to the industry where we are in.
Thank you. And I've just seen the bright red time is up sign put onto the screen in front of me, so obviously that's the note that we're going to have to end on. I think Alex is going to come back to the stage and give us a little bit of housekeeping, so please stay in your seats. But before we do that, please join me in thanking this wonderful panel.